Hello. Today we are going to talk for a few minutes about the difference between analysis and summary. This can be kind of tricky, especially when you're analyzing um, things deeply and in writing for the first time. You might think, wow, I've spent a long time writing this paper and it's 5 pages long. I've definitely done analysis. When unfortunately, you might have just summarized what happened in the book. So let's look at this together to figure out how you can avoid summary so that you are doing purely analysis. So a definition for analysis is this. It's breaking down a topic into smaller pieces so that you can examine those pieces closely and better understand the whole thing. This is true in any subject in school, in math and science and history, definitely in English, but it's also true out in the real world. If you're having a problem with your plumbing, you're going to analyze it. You're going to break that problem down into smaller pieces to try to figure out what the problem is. It's true in business. It's true in your friendships, in your relationships. If someone's mad at you, you're going to analyze that to try to figure out why. You're going to break down their behavior and your behavior into smaller pieces so that you can look at them really close up and figure out what's going on. So this isn't just a school skill. It's definitely not just an English class skill. This is a life skill that you are going to use forever and ever and ever. In general, here's a side-by-side comparison. Let's start with summary, because summary is what's more natural to you. A summary is a recap of what has happened in a story. It's just retelling what happened in different words. It's usually chronological, meaning you start at the beginning and you work until you get into the end. And it's purely factual. There's no room for debate. There's no room for different opinions. We could look it up in the book and we would see that, yes, that is the order of events. Analysis is something really different. When we analyze something, we look at specific elements to see what their purpose is or what their meaning is. So instead of looking at every single event that happened in the book, we're just looking at symbolism, or we're just looking at character development, or we are just looking at the kinds of word choice that the writer makes in order to show us something about the character. In analysis, those elements are discussed in detail, and they're usually followed by a so what. So we wouldn't just say, here are a list of words that J.D. Salinger uses to describe Holden. At the end, we would also say, so what? So this is what that means. This is what that shows us about Holden. This is what we understand by looking at Salinger's word choice. And when we write analysis, it's usually organized by idea or by those elements. It's not organized chronologically. So we don't start at the beginning of the book and work our way to the end of the book. We talk about this element, then we talk about that element, then we talk about the next element, etc. So this is from Cliff's Notes, actually. This is a summary of The Catcher in the Rye. Let's listen to it. In J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield recounts the days following his expulsion from Princey Prep, a private school. After a fight with his roommate Stradlater, Holden leaves school 2 days early to explore New York before returning home, interacting with teachers, prostitutes, nun, an old girlfriend, and his sister along the way. J.D. Salinger's classic The Catcher in the Rye illustrates a teenager's dramatic struggle against death and growing up. So you'll see that this is just a recapping of what happens in the book. Starts, with the beginning where Holden is sort of talking about the story he's going to tell. Then he goes to Princey Prep where he's expelled. Then he has a fight with his roommate. Then he leaves school 2 days early. Then he explores New York. Then he interacts with these people. The end. It goes chronologically. There's nothing really new here. There's nothing opinionated. It's basically just a listing of facts. Here, by turn, is an example of analysis. Now, this is also from Cliff's Notes, so it's not, the most mind-blowing analysis ever, but listen to the difference. The dominating theme of The Catcher in the Rye is the protection of innocence, especially of children. For most of the book, Holden sees this as a primary virtue. It is very closely related to his struggle against growing up. Holden's enemy is the world and the cruelty and artificiality that it entails. The people he admires all represent or protect innocence. He thinks of Jane Gallagher, for example, not as a maturing young woman, but as a girl with whom he used to play checkers. He goes out of his way to tell us that he and Jane had no sexual relationship. Quite sweetly, they usually just held hands. Holden comforted Jane when she was distressed, and it bothers him that Jane may have been subjected to sexual advances from her drunken stepfather or from her date, Holden's roommate Stradlater. So you'll see this is not just retelling what happens in the book. This is looking at one element. In this case, it's looking at theme. Theme is protection of innocence. And then the writer goes on to tell us where they see that in the book. The people he admires all represent innocence, and then specifically Jane Gallagher, and then evidence, right? Evidence that this is the way that he feels about Jane Gallagher. So you can see the difference between just retelling what happens in the book or retelling what happens with a character and actually focusing in on specific elements of the text and what they might mean. That's the job of analysis. So what does this mean for you? Well, if you were writing a book review, it should not be chronological. So you should not start at the beginning and give your opinion of what you think of the book. You should organize it around ideas or organize it around elements of the text. Your ideas should be about specific elements of the text. And if you want more detail on this, there's another mini lesson, What to Discuss About a Book, that will help you think about what those elements should be. Each element you examine should be discussed in detail and with evidence. And all of this should revolve around your claim. Remember that we've talked in class about how a book review makes a claim, that this is what kind of book it is. This is its big idea, and here's what works about it, and here doesn't. So all of these elements should be things that work well, things that don't work well, things that help show that big idea of the book, okay? Worst case scenario, this is what to avoid. A summary of the book with your opinion at the end. You do not want to do like a book report here where you summarize what happens in The Catcher in the Rye and then at the end say, this was a good book, you should read it. That's not a book review. If you're doing a character study, it also should not just be a chronological recounting of what the character does in the book. Of course, you're going to mention what they do in the book, but it should not just be a summary of their action. Your ideas should be about specific facets of the character's personality. And again, there's another lesson for you, What to Discuss About a Character. And that's going to walk you through some different elements that you might hit upon. Each element of the character's personality should be discussed in detail and with evidence. And it should revolve around your claim about what the character is like and why they're important. For you, character studiers, the worst case scenario, the thing to avoid, is just kind of like a boring list of personality traits and a summary of what he does in the text. You know, you would say like, Holden is hypocritical and a loner and depressed. For example, at the beginning of the book, he's kicked out of Pincy Prep, and then he goes to New York where he hires a prostitute and finds his sister, right? That's not looking at specific elements of his personality in detail and giving evidence. That's listing his traits and then summarizing what he does in the book. Last but not least, infographicers, your infographic probably should not be a chronological depiction of the book. It might be. It depends on what you're doing in your infographic. This may be a point where you want to consult with your teacher. If you're going chronologically and starting at the beginning and working until the end, talk to your teacher to make sure that what you're working on is appropriate. An infographic should look at one element of the text, right? You're looking at Holden's character, you're looking at word choice, you're looking at Holden's view of other people, etc. It should look at the chosen element in detail and with evidence. That's all the stuff of your infographic. And it should revolve around that implicit claim. This is another thing that we talked about how when you're making an infographic, the claim is more inside your head than it is written on paper. But still, you should be including the evidence, the data, the details, all of those things that support that claim, that idea that you have in your head. Worst case scenario for you would be like a list of words that are in the book, or summaries of what characters do in the book, or a straightforward, simple timeline of events. These things don't involve analysis. They don't ask you to do any thinking. They don't ask you to do any deeper understanding. So again, if you're really nervous about this, if you're not sure where yours is falling, please talk to your teacher. And that goes for any of you. If you are just not sure if what you're doing is analysis or summary, this is a great point to conference on. Pick a section of your draft and say, okay, tomorrow in class, I'm going to conference with my teacher and see if this is summary or if this is analysis.